Hello, everyone. The next set of documents that we're going to get into is from the Constitutional Convention, which happened in 1787. And the document specifically that we're going to look at was written by Benjamin Franklin. It's his speech that he gave in the convention. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background information on Benjamin Franklin himself, as well as what the Constitutional Convention actually was and why it took place. Benjamin Franklin was born in 1706 and died in 1790. From his teen years until retirement at age 42, Ben Franklin worked as a printer. He actually got started as an apprentice to his brother James Franklin, who was a Boston printer, and by the time he was 16, Ben was not only printing but actually writing parts of his brother's newspaper. He used the pen name Silence Dogood, and he wrote letters satirizing daily life and politics in Boston. When he was 17, Franklin moved to Philadelphia and he opened up his own print shop, and this kind of gave birth to one of the most enduring contributions to American culture. This was called Poor Richard's Almanac. This annual publication, which was published from 1732 to 1752, contained information, observations, and advice, and was considered a colonial bestseller. So just as he had signed Silence Dogood to the letters that he wrote for his brother's paper, Franklin created a fictitious author/editor for the almanac. The chatty Richard Saunders, or Poor Richard, first appeared as a dull and foolish astronomer. However, over the years, his character developed, becoming more thoughtful, pious, and funny. Like most almanacs, Poor Richard's Almanac contained practical information about the calendar, the sun, the moon, and the weather. It also featured a wealth of homespun sayings and observations, many of which are still quoted today. It was these that made the almanac so popular. Franklin included one at the top of or the bottom of almost all of the almanac's pages. The wit and brevity of these sayings allowed him to weave in many moral messages while also entertaining his readers. When Franklin was 42, he retired from the printing business to devote himself to science. He proved to be a successful scientist as he had been a printer. Over the course of his life, Franklin was responsible for inventing the lightning rod, bifocals, and a new type of stove. He confirmed the laws of electricity, he charted the Gulf Stream, and contributed to the scientific understanding of earthquakes and ocean currents. In spite of all of these achievements, Franklin is best remembered for his career in politics. Franklin played an important role in drafting the Declaration of Independence, enlisting French support during the Revolutionary War, negotiating a peace treaty with Britain, and drafting the United States Constitution. In his later years, he was the United States ambassador to England and then to France. Even before George Washington earned the title, Franklin was actually considered to be the father of his country. Perhaps it is no surprise that a person of Franklin's accomplishments, longevity, and historic importance would write the story of his life. Franklin's The Autobiography remains a classic of the genre as well as a prototype for the American success story. Franklin wrote the first section of the work in 1771 when he was 65 years old. At the urging of friends, he wrote 3 more sections, the last shortly before his death, but succeeding in bringing the account of his life only to the year 1759. Though never completed, his autobiography, filled with his opinions and advice, provides not only a record of his achievements, but also an understanding of his extraordinary character. After the American Revolution, each of the newly independent states created its own constitution. While Congress was able to pass limited laws, it had no power to tax the states or regulate issues such as trade that were affected by state boundaries. These problems led to the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Representatives from 12 states met to approve a national constitution. The argument was lively and often contentious. At the age of 81, Benjamin Franklin, representing Pennsylvania, brought his diplomatic skills to the debate.
Okay, so Franklin's speech was successful. The Constitution was approved and sent to the states for ratification. And one of the main reasons for the success of this speech was Franklin's use of rhetorical devices. Rhetorical devices are ways of using language for effect. They specifically appeal to the audience, and they're one of the main things that produce a successful speech. The examples of rhetorical devices that we're going to look at today are paradox, concession, rhetorical question, and tone. So a paradox is a statement that seems contradictory, but actually it presents a truth. Also, paradoxes may be contrary to what is expected in the situation. Some examples include statements like, I must be cruel to be kind, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, and I shut my eyes so that I can see. So you can see with each of these examples, if I were to say I must be cruel to be kind, on face value, it sounds like those two things are polar opposites. However, if you think a little bit more deeply about it, sometimes we have to, you call it tough love. Sometimes you have to give somebody tough love because that's really the best thing for them. So that would be an example then where that statement would be true, which is what makes it a paradox. Okay, so a concession is when a speaker acknowledges the arguments of an opposing view. And this is a really good technique because you're actually acknowledging and saying, hey, yes, I know that this is one of the points that my opposition is saying, but then you can go on to refute that to talk about why that isn't true. So the example here, if I was making the argument that students who are absent are sick and they're not really making fun of or taking advantage of the situation, then I might make a concession before I make that argument that says, I agree that many students act and lie about being sick so that they can avoid school. However, that's not the case for most students. Next, we have rhetorical questions, and these are questions that are asked to make a point or for effect, or sometimes they're used to introduce a topic, but these are not questions that need to be answered. The answer is supposed to be obvious, and it's supposed to help reinforce the speaker's point. So, for example, I don't know if your parents have ever looked at you and said, if everyone else jumped off a bridge, would you jump too? Obviously, they're not asking for you to answer that. They're trying to reinforce the point that you don't need to do what everyone else is doing. And finally, we have tone. And it's important to note that tone is not really specifically a rhetorical device. However, it is another way that speakers can sway their listeners and their audience. And the way that they do this is by portraying the attitude that they have towards the subject or towards the audience themselves. So when you're looking for the author's tone, phrasing and word choice is going to be really important here. You look at the types of words that they use and how they phrase words, and then you come up with a tone based on those words. So examples of tone might be serious. So if they use very serious, somber language, then the tone might be serious. You might have a tone that's humorous, which means that they're joking and very lighthearted language. You might have a tone that's friendly, like you would speak to your friend. Cynical would be very pessimistic and looking on the bad side of things. So if they're complaining a lot and using a lot of those complaining words, then you might have a cynical tone. Okay, so let's practice and see if we can look at this passage and pick out the rhetorical devices that are being used. Let's quickly read over the passage and then we'll get into the questions. The passage says, doctors and health professionals agree exercise is one of the most important things you can do for your health. Many fitness experts advise people to go to a gym at least 3 times a week and work out on fitness machines. I think fitness machines are great for those who like them. However, most people in my experience are bored silly by fitness machines and need to force themselves to use them. The result is that the majority of people who join gyms end up quitting after a few months. Is there anything that can be done? I think that people who play games for fitness do much better. Now there are some who regard games as childish and a waste of time. But to me, there are many people like me, games are fun. The desire to improve and win in a game provides people with motivation. As a result, they don't end up quitting their exercise regime. Which kinds of games are good? Any game that are competitive. I recommend tennis, racquetball, squash, basketball, soccer, softball, or many other things. Come on, get in the game, folks. So, if I were to ask you what concession the author makes, then we can look at the line where he says, I think fitness machines are great for those who like them. Okay, that's a concession because that goes against his point that most people are bored by fitness machines. If I were to ask you what the tone was, then I might say it's a very encouraging tone because it's a very motivational piece. Notice he says, come on, get in the game, folks, which is a very encouraging statement. And it's also a very light-hearted tone, so that might be the tone of the piece. If I asked you to find a rhetorical question, there's actually a few in here, but where he says, is there anything that can be done? Okay, this is a rhetorical question because he doesn't want the audience to answer. He's actually about to use that question as a starting point or a kickoff point for what he's going to tell you that his solution is. And okay, yeah, that's all for that passage. We're going to look at one last passage to practice, and then we're going to have you actually practice on your own with the speech in the convention. So this passage says, in today's world, a tremendous amount of trouble is caused by internet sites that promote some kind of hostile tech ideology. Security-minded individuals promote a system in which the internet is tightly controlled. This kind of a system functions efficiently in non-open countries like China. In China, dangerous internet sites are shut down almost immediately, which is a good thing. However, the price that the Chinese pay for this security is enormous. In addition to truly dangerous sites, thousands of legitimate sites get shut down every week because of some imagined threat. If a system like that were installed in the US, studies show that it would not only make our nation more autocratic, it would also stifle innovation and commerce. Safety can be dangerous. How can we even consider trading our freedom for a little security? I'm against internet censoring. So if I asked you to pick out a paradox that was included in this passage, you might go to the statement that says safety can be dangerous. Again, a paradox is a statement that seems contradictory, but actually will hold some truth to it. So you can see where the words safety and dangerous are opposing words. So at face value, it would be hard to think about how something that's supposed to be safe could also be dangerous. The next question is what concession is made in the passage. And if you get the whole point of the passage, he's saying that censoring the internet is bad. However, when he talks about China and how they shut down dangerous internet sites, he also says, which is a good thing. So that's a concession that he's making, that it's good that China shuts down dangerous internet sites. If I were to ask you the tone of this passage, hopefully you can see the difference in the way that this passage is written and the passage before it. While the passage before it was much more lighthearted and friendly, this has a much more serious tone. You can see he uses words like trouble, tightly controlled, threat, stifle. Okay, and so these are all words that have a much more serious connotation to them. And finally, if I asked you to find a rhetorical device in this question, then you can look for this last question right here that he asked when he says, how can we even consider trading our freedom for a little security? So once again, he's not asking the audience to answer that question. He's posing that question to reinforce his point that sometimes freedom is more important than security. Okay, so now that we've gone over what rhetorical devices mean and looked at some examples, we want you to apply your knowledge by finding some rhetorical devices in Franklin's speech at the convention. And if you're a distant learner, your questions are directly on Kidim, so you can pull up the PDF of the speech and then just have it side by side on your computer screen with the questions, and then you can find those rhetorical devices and answer the questions in Kidim. For those of you that are in-class students, you can turn to page 47 of your textbook, and your teacher will direct you on which questions to answer in your book.